Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with more evidence of Trump's mental impairment from a deranged rant he posted on Truth Social about Tylenol and vaccines at 4:19 a.m. Sunday, offering dangerously absurd medical advice. Joining us to discuss the sociopathic and psychopathic characteristics Trump shares with patients in mental institutions our first guest, Dr. Bandy Lee, has studied, we will examine the paradox of the unbound grandiosity of his ego at the same time its apparent frailty, since the most powerful man in the world so desperately yearns and expects praise and flattery. Dr. Lee is a medical doctor, forensic psychiatrist, and a world expert on violence who taught at Yale School of Medicine and Yale Law School for 17 years. She led a group of mental health professional colleagues in breaking the silence about Donald Trump's dangerous psychology and published the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess the president. She is currently president of the World Mental Health Coalition, and her latest books are Profile of a Nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, Psychology of Trump Contagion, An Existential Danger to American Democracy and All Humankind, and the updated and expanded edition, The Much More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 50 psychiatrists and mental health experts warn anew. She also blogs at bandyxlee.substack. Then, with Trump having threatened to invade Canada and make it a 51st state, we'll look into his latest attack on our neighbor by slapping an additional 10% tariff on Canada for a TV commercial featuring President Reagan warning against tariffs that played on the first two of the World Series baseball games between the LA Dodgers and the Toronto Blue Jays. Joining us from Toronto is Stephen Marche, a novelist and culture writer who has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker, Esquire, and many other outlets. His recent books include The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future, and The Last Election, co-authored with Andrew Yang. Then finally, we'll assess what happened at the just concluded ASEAN summit in Malaysia and what was not achieved, and speak with Sarang, the director of the Global South program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, where his research focuses on geopolitical risk, grand strategy, and climate security, with a special emphasis on Asia and the Global South. We will discuss his article at Responsible Statecraft, America First Meets ASEAN Way in Kuala Lumpur. And before we begin with our tax dollars paying for the bombing of innocents abroad and racist thuggery at home, as families are ripped apart and neighbors disappeared from our streets, shops, and schools, we find ourselves at a moral moment when America's better angels have to be mobilized against a cruel and corrupt regime enabled by political cowardice and judicial blindness. The only way to save our democracy from its current descent into fascism is a massive mobilization of people power against a plutocratic-funded 2026 Trump campaign of voter suppression and intimidation by masked government thugs. As Trump cowers the owners of the press and defunds public broadcasting, Background Briefing needs your support to keep providing a reality-based daily briefing that exposes the regime's malevolent machinations to protect and defend our constitutional rights and freedom of speech and assembly. We ask you to make a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at our foundation, publictruthmedia.org, and thank you for defending the home of the brave and the land of the free. And joining us now, Dr. Bandy Lee, who's a medical doctor, forensic psychiatrist, and a world expert on violence, who taught at Yale School of Medicine at Yale Law School for 17 years. She led a group of mental health professional colleagues in breaking the silence about Donald Trump's dangerous psychology in publishing the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess the president. She's currently president of the World Mental Health Coalition, and her latest books are Profile of a Nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, Psychology of Trump Contagion, An Existential Danger to American Democracy and All Humankind, and the updated and expanded edition, The Much More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 50 psychiatrists and mental health experts warn anew, and she also blogs at bandyxlee.substack. Welcome to Background Briefing, Dr. Bandy Lee.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And of course, Trump is in Asia. He's been in Malaysia. Now he's in Japan. He'll be going to South Korea to meet with Xi on Thursday. But the 79-year-old president was just recently in Malaysia, and he sent out this bizarre post on Truth Social, all in caps, as though he's some kind of a obstetrician at 4:19 a.m. local time, advising women not to take Tylenol and not to take various vaccines. And he talked about one for, particularly not take one for hepatitis, which he misspelt. I mean, this is not the behavior of any president in our past. And you wonder about what goes on in these meetings. If you're posting crazy stuff at 4:19 a.m. and your next meeting is at 8 o'clock in the morning, I wonder what goes on in these meetings. How does it strike you?
Well, that is the reason why we as mental health experts felt a societal responsibility to come forward as strongly as we could, as early as we could, to alert the public about the dangers that we would be in if a person such as this would continue to be in the presidency. Some of us tried to warn before he became president the first time, and a lot of us warned right after his inauguration. And that this is the reason why I had been meeting with more than 50 Congress members early in the first Trump presidency, that if we allowed such a man to continue to be in that influential position, he would become uncontainable and unstoppable. And that is where we are right now. And it's very dangerous as he's meeting with foreign leaders, because he has made it known to the entire world just how impaired he is and how manipulable and defeatable he would be. And he represents our nation.
But when you talk to congressmen, and the problem is that the Republican congressmen in the House and in the Senate are either intimidated by him or are simply cowards. They are enabling him. In fact, the House is being shut down by Speaker Johnson, largely to prevent the so-called Epstein list of pedophiles from going public. But in doing so, Johnson is basically abdicating a whole branch of government in terms of checks and balances, which is just unprecedented. So what explains that? I mean, as bad as Trump is in many ways, his enablers, I think, know better, and therefore they're pretty disgraceful.
Yes, indeed. And we'll find more and more disgraceful and outrageous people surrounding him. The dynamics of how that actually happens is illustrated in my book that you mentioned, The Psychology of Trump Contagion. That the reason why we stated that such an impaired person being in the US presidency was not an individual problem, but a public health emergency, in fact, which is how we framed it since the very beginning, is because of the contagious influences he would have, not only in transmitting his actual mental symptoms. That's something that people don't realize, that delusions and severe symptoms such as paranoia or violence proneness actually spread more quickly than simple propaganda or strategic lies, because the emotional compulsion to believe these false narratives will be much stronger because of his impairment. And I describe that somewhat like a contagious disease in the Trump contagion. In fact, mental symptoms may spread more rapidly and widely because one does not need physical exposure in order for it to spread. One needs only emotional bonds. And there will be enablers, politicians, billionaires, foreign dictators who will seize this as an extraordinary opportunity for their nefarious goals, because seldom does one have this level of impairment in such an important position for the most powerful country in the world. And it's probably the first time in US history where mental pathology has been weaponized for political ends.
Well, but what about the enablers in Silicon Valley, the tech bros, the richest people on the planet, the most powerful people on the planet. Musk, Thiel, who's of course his protege is the vice president waiting in the wings to take over, and the powerful media barons, and another tech guy who's bought up CBS, TikTok, and about to buy Warner Brothers and CNN. There's nothing more powerful as a political and a psychological tool than social media. It's proven. I mean,
That's right.
if you go back to Hitler, Goebbels weaponized radio, which was the main communication tool in those days. But now you've got social media that's 1,000 times more powerful than what Goebbels had. And I think, in many ways have changed our culture, but also have really been the most important enablers of Trump. They all showed up at his inauguration standing behind him. What's going on with them? They're also going to have their names. They're paying for this horrible monstrosity that's going to destroy the entire White House in terms of it being completely out of scale and being our worst president in our history is going to torment us for the ages with this horrible building. But these people are the ones that paid for it. So they are the most obviously important enablers. But how do we understand them? Are they just simply being blackmailed and rewarded for their loyalty? Or are they so cynical, or do they think somehow that they're more powerful and that he's not that important and he'll go away one day and then they'll have their guy in the White House, J.D. Vance?
Well, we have to realize that this level of mental impairment, mental pathology, does not think and does not attract logical and rational thinking. So the hallmark of pathology is that it's self-destructive. It's destructive when it occurs in physically, but when it occurs mentally, it takes over the drive for life and converts it to a drive for destruction and death. And so, far more than blackmailing or bribes will be the compulsion and the simple need to follow his lead and to participate in it. The ecstasy of doing so will be far greater than any material advantage. That is why eventually it will even override the desire for self-interest or even survival. So we're in a very dangerous place. I've also been writing more and speaking more about the structures that have led to such unfit leaders taking up important positions, whether it be in business or politics. And the fact that we have built our society around hierarchies and then open it up for anyone, in a sense, to run for office, for example. There are hardly any qualifications that are needed for one to run for elected office, unlike any other job or position. To be a military officer, for example, you have to pass rigorous mental health screens, and to handle nuclear weapons, you have to undergo very extensive psychological testing and pass it every year. And yet the person who commands nuclear weapons is not given such requirements. And so such loose standards and guardrails, and yet affording the position so much power. The executive branch of government, for example, has accumulated enormous levels of power, and therefore it will attract individuals who will have pathological drives for power for ulterior reasons than to do good with it. And so we have the perfect setup for attracting unfit leaders and basically allowing them to take over and destroy society. We as a population need to understand how these dynamics work, how the human psychology works when such structures are set up, that we almost make it inevitable that power-hungry, disordered individuals will preoccupy themselves with gaining these positions and then occupy these positions amongst themselves so that they can further create their own, in other words, more disordered persons who would be attracted to such positions. So Donald Trump, in a sense, he's the product of larger structures at play, as well as a producer of more such individuals being attracted to surrounding him and enabling and taking part in what eventually is a drive toward destruction.
So, Dr. Bandy Lee, in our earlier conversations, and since you spend a lot of time studying sociopaths and psychopaths inside maximum security mental health facilities, many of whom have done some pretty horrible stuff, one of the things that I remember you saying was that the worst thing you can do with a disordered person like a sociopath and a psychopath is to give them power. Well, 77 million Americans gave Trump the ultimate power, being the most powerful man on the planet. But what I find extraordinary is if you see the sycophantic, embarrassing behavior of the cabinet, where it's a ritual where they have to go around the table inside the White House, and every cabinet member has to say these unctuous, flattering, phony, syrupy stuff. Which, if somebody said that to me, I would think that they were insulting me, not praising me, because it's so transparent. The flattery is so fraudulent, yet he laps it up. So what explains this idea this man has such grandiosity, he's going to inflict this dreadful ballroom on us for our posterity, unless somebody tears it down later on. But at the same time, he clearly has an incredibly fragile ego. So I don't understand that paradox.
Yes, that's the paradox of human defenses when things get to so impaired a level. The grandiosity should be seen as a defense against overwhelming feelings of inadequacy and weakness rather than strength. And his fragility is what we need to see through. Many people are afraid of him, and of course, he's set up this entire system around him now, co-opting the National Guard and the federal forces, and turning them into his own secret force. And um, he will continue to do this until we recognize as a people that he's actually a very scared, fragile person inside, and that he's actually crying out for containment. I recently wrote an article speaking of the developmental stages that a person goes through, and when one is traumatized or abandoned, as he was at an early age, then one tends to arrest at that developmental stage. And so he does not have the personal capacity to set limits on himself, and he will continue to aggress and violate and demolish, as the demolition of the White House illustrates. He will not stop there either. He will simply continue until he is stopped from the outside. And that was what I was trying to tell the Congress members, and what I was trying to alert the public about when we published our first book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, when there were first 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts. It was an unprecedented New York Times bestseller of its kind within 3 months, and we were the #1 topic of national conversation. At that point, the Congress members were depending on us, in fact, to educate the public medically so that they can intervene politically. Of course, that was interrupted, unfortunately, by the corrupted American Psychiatric Association, which said erroneously that what we were doing was unethical, when in fact we were fulfilling our societal responsibility to protect society. We have a primary responsibility to protect society. And I would still state that that is the case, that mental health experts need to be consulted with, because this is our area of study where we examine and intervene with the underlying dynamics that make individuals dangerous. And although we have not acted in the public sphere as often, sometimes we do when we consult with courts, prisons, or governments, but we can inform the policymakers and the public about the kinds of dynamics we're dealing with and the level of intervention that is necessary to bring ourselves to a safer place than we are right now, because the dangers will only increase, and we've only seen the beginning of his destruction. And as you may note, it's been accelerating rapidly to the point where this level and speed and degree of destruction has seldom been seen in any dictatorship, let alone in the US.
But just in closing, so what you're describing, Dr. Lee, is a frightened little man inside this sort of large character that is full of bluster and bravado, but secretly he knows, as is manifestly clear, that he's totally out of his depths. He's completely incompetent. He should never have ever gotten anywhere near the Oval Office. And he's always been in his own world. I did my homework when he first came on the scene in 2015, talked to a bunch of Wall Street people who'd dealt with him and said he's always lived in his own world, full of bravado and boasting and completely delusional. So what's the answer here? How do you get him or somebody to intervene and let him know that, look, you clearly don't know what you're doing and you just should retire and save us all from this wrecking crew and this wrecking ball that you represent as such a flawed person who is, supposedly a builder, but you are in fact a destroyer.
Yes. In fact, I think people will learn that there's very little that he has built. And a large part of it is simply putting his name on things that other people have done and those things that he has built. He has destroyed a lot of lives and companies in the process by not paying them. Yes, what you have said touches on the crux of the issue, that we are dealing with a personality disorder and a damaged individual who is very familiar to mental health experts. I've seen at least 1,000 of such individuals in my career, and we need to deal with them and manage them in the correct way. We have failed to do so because um, our nation is frightened. They have never seen such an individual before and allowed uh, such an individual near power. Once he came close to power, the correct response was to contain him as quickly as possible and to understand exactly what we were dealing with. But the American Psychiatric Association truncated that. And as you may note, mental health experts are all but totally absent in public discourse when we ought to be at the center. And right now, what needs to happen is urgent meetings. In fact, every conscientious politician, policymaker, anyone who has any influence should be dropping everything and holding meetings about this. And we were available. In fact, Congress members have reached out to us secretly here and there, but not at the level at which this should be happening. And we simply need to understand that what we're dealing with is a mental health problem that has been able to infiltrate and spread in the political sphere by pretty much hijacking people's minds through the spread of symptoms, through gaslighting, manipulation, and hypnotic influences called spellbinding by some political psychologists when such impaired individuals manage to get close to power. We need to remove them from power as soon as possible and to find out ways to do so. It is easier than we think. Of course, it's incredibly dangerous now, but less dangerous than if we were to allow him to remain.
Well, Dr. Bandy Lee, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Dr. Bandy Lee, who's a medical doctor, forensic psychiatrist, and a world expert on violence, who taught at Yale School of Medicine and at Yale Law School for 17 years. She led a group of mental health professional colleagues in breaking the silence about Donald Trump's dangerous psychology in publishing the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. She's currently president of the World Mental Health Coalition, and her latest books are Profile of a Nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, Psychology of Trump Contagion, An Existential Danger to American Democracy and All Humankind, and the updated and expanded edition, The Much More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 50 psychiatrists and mental health experts warn anew. And she also blogs at bandyxlee.substack. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back to look into how Trump has already threatened to invade Canada and make it 51st state. And now he is slapping an additional 10% tariff on Canada for commercials featuring President Reagan warning against tariffs that played on the first two World Series baseball games between the LA Dodgers and the Toronto Blue Jays.
Crazy, crazy for feeling so lonely. I'm crazy, crazy for feeling so blue.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Stephen Marche, who's a novelist and culture writer who has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker, Esquire, and many other outlets. His recent books include The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future, and The Last Election, co-authored with Andrew Yang. And he joins us from Toronto. Welcome to Background Briefing, Stephen Marche.
Always a pleasure, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And baseball, the American pastime, the American game, is now featuring a Canadian team, the Blue Jays, the Toronto Blue Jays. And in the playoffs, the television coverage played commercials that had been paid for by the government of Ontario that featured Ronald Reagan talking about how terrible tariffs were. And it's clearly unquestionably it is Ronald Reagan. The sequence of his remarks was slightly altered, but the weight of what he was saying was clearly and deeply uncomfortable for Donald Trump, who watches television all day, and one of the few things that he understands is television, being a reality TV star, and he's gone ballistic over it. And then on Friday's game, which the Blue Jays won, in the World Series, it was played again, and then it was played again on Saturday's game, which our local team here in Los Angeles, the Dodgers, won, and now it's being pulled, so it won't be played today, Monday. But the damage is being done because Trump has slapped 10% tariffs on Canada to punish the entire country for a television ad. So go figure. Go figure.
Well, he said he's going to put 10% tariffs on Canada. It's never really clear when he says tariffs, it's really never very clear what he means. I mean, he said he was going to put 100% tariffs on films, but of course, films aren't a material substance, so you can't really tariff them. So it was just a rage blast, and he cut off talks with Canada. But, I think in all seriousness, I think Canada's quite used to this right now, and it doesn't surprise us at all.
Well, it shouldn't, because he said early on that he wanted to make you 51st state.
That's right. I mean, he's been very clear about the threat to Canada, and that he wants to use economic force to manipulate us. And it has been a very sudden change for us. We really have been integrating with the United States basically since the '60s, economically, politically, culturally. And we have to turn away from that very suddenly and very quickly. And I think we are, it's going to take some time. It's probably going to take half a decade to get out of American clutches, but at least we know what we have to do. And we have to pull away from America as hard as we possibly can. And that's sort of the larger story, and sort of the frantic kind of Mad King discourse that emerges from Washington is far less relevant than that sort of large scale decision that we've made as a country.
And of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney recently was in the Oval Office meeting with Trump, and Trump went on a rant about trans and wokeness and was quite nasty in his remarks. And sitting next to him silently is the Canadian Prime Minister, who happens to have a trans kid. Um,
Yeah.
and there's no way in the world that Trump didn't know that. So we know what a horrible and cruel man Trump is. But then in his pettiness, he refused to meet with Mark Carney in Kuala Lumpur at the ASEAN summit, at which the Canadian Prime Minister said that talked about the importance of reliable partners who honor their commitments. And he went on to say that Canada intends to more than double our exports away from the United States over the course of the next decade.
Mhm.
So Canadians are proud of their prime minister and proud of their stance against Trump, but they're going to suffer economically, are they not?
Oh, we're going to be punched in the face. Yeah, there's no question that we're going to be there. We're going to suffer economically. I mean, either way that it works out, either, the way we're probably going to suffer is that the American economy is going to undergo some serious recession, and we'll be caught in the tailwinds of that. But yeah, or America will force us into recession one way or the other. But it's not I think we've all kind of adjusted to that. Like, we know that that's coming. I mean, that's why the budget that's coming is probably going to be very, very belt tightening. It's going to probably see a lot of cuts to services and a lot of cuts to the civil service, and we're going to really have to batten down the hatches here for a while. But I think Carney is the most popular prime minister at this point in his tenure that's ever existed in Canada. As in this long into his term, and I think the reason for that is very simple: is that we know that we gave him a very specific job, i.e., America's a bus going off a cliff, get us out of this bus, and he's doing it to the best of his ability, as far as anyone can tell. So yeah, I mean, Canada's really kind of, I mean, from what I can tell from my sources in the civil service, we're practically on a war footing. Like, we're making drastic changes very rapidly, and to get out of the way of the Americans and make sure they have as little influence on us as possible. They always are going to have a massive influence on us, but to limit their power over us, as much as we can get to, and as soon as possible, is really the goal of the whole country. And I think it's interesting to see that, because it's very much a ground up kind of movement. I mean, you have the boycotts of American travel and American products that are not mandated. Like there is a ban in a lot of these provinces against U.S. alcohol. But, no one is saying you can't go to America, and yet American travel to America is down, enormously year over year. So there's a ground up support, but then the government is actually, of almost every province, is really on the same page with people. And so you can move pretty fast when you've got those conditions met, really.
Well, given that the World Series games is between Los Angeles,
Mm,
the Dodgers here, and
yeah.
your team in Toronto, the Blue Jays, the governor of California has basically reached out to Canada, and we're in a similar situation here, where Trump has actually declared war on our state as well, and we are the fifth largest economy in the world. So
Yeah.
I guess we got something in common then, Stephen.
The American president hates both sides on the World Series. It's an unusual situation. You know what I mean? Usually he can be a fan of one side or the other. Now he hates both of us. Yeah. I mean, it is interesting to see how we're kind of making arrangements with individual states. It's clear that Ontario and California are more united in values and than, say, California and Texas. I think And I think that's also true, for example, for the northeastern states and for particularly for Illinois and also for Michigan, right? Where I mean, and those are places that are pretty close to on Canadians' hearts. Like they're huge communities living near the northern New York State that are pretty much in they commute across the border, and the same goes for Detroit and Windsor in Michigan. And like those are places that are very important to Canada. And I think there's actually more of a bond between us and them than in the United States right now. And I don't think that bodes very well for the survival of the United States as a country. Like I mean, I genuinely think that's what are you doing living with these people is kind of is kind of how we feel about the states that are friendly to us.
So, what can Gavin Newsom of California and the Premier of Ontario afford, who's obviously they're both heavily on the top of Trump's enemies list? What can they
Well,
do?
I don't think there's much I mean, I don't think there's much they can do right now while he's absolutely on the rampage. But I mean, from the point of view of Doug Ford, I mean, one of the reasons he's running these ads, just to be clear, is that he's probably going to make a run for prime minister someday. He's the most popular conservative politician, and I mean, he's definitely firmly in the right? Like he's a right wing politician, and I mean, he's the brother of Rob Ford, right? So like he probably will make a run for prime minister someday, and these ads are absolutely going to help him in that endeavor. They absolutely will. So then you have Governor Newsom, who is in a very peculiar position where he's the governor of the state that is absolutely the economic engine of the United States in the clearest possible way. It's the richest place on earth by a significant amount and contributes, I think it's 27% of all federal treasuries. And the president of the United States is undermining all the source of that prosperity. And I think states like California are going to have to just defederalize in a very elaborate way. And what that means, actually, while the federal government is essentially non-functional and doesn't seem to be a plan to even try to bring back the federal government as a force. This is gonna pose some very, very tricky and existential questions for the state of California. I mean, as much as as it does for Canada.
Well, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney did appear to take a dig at the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, in saying in Kuala Lumpur that the negotiations with the Americans over trade are solely the responsibility of the government of Canada. But that's a pretty
Yes,
polite
but that's
dig.
a little like that's a if the federal provincial struggles in Canada are quite real, they always have been. Like they've been a struggle since we repatriated our constitution in 1982. So I think what he's saying to Doug Ford is like, Trump can get angry at you, but he's got to deal with us. And I think that's as much a message for Trump as it is for Ford.
But Trump is targeting the basis of Canada's economy, right? The tariffs are on autos, steel, aluminum, and lumber. And that's a 50% tariff, right?
Yes.
And then he's adding an extra 10% on lumber.
Yeah.
And some auto parts are subject to 25%. So
Very
it's going to
hard thing
be,
to do since those are the exact things that America just cannot live without. Like I mean, there's no way to make aluminum at the way that Canada makes it because of all the hydroelectric power in Quebec. There is not the softwood lumber in the United States that Canada has. There is not like these tariffs are being imposed, but they're also like and they affect things like house prices and very basic manufacturing costs. Same with the auto parts. I mean, you can see what's happening with Ford. Like Ford are not happy about this at all, right? So it is a bit like the scene in Blazing Saddles where the sheriff takes himself hostage by pointing a gun at his own head. I mean, especially those targets. They're absolutely the ones that it's sort of like the tariffs on Brazilian coffee. I mean, there's nothing that America can do to replace it, and so it's not really strategic. It does seem to me to be completely wild, angry, and harming of American interests first and foremost.
Right. And of course, Trump took the tariffs off Brazilian orange juice, which is 60% of the market here, for that very reason, that the American
Right.
people didn't want to sit down to their breakfast and have to spend more money on orange juice. But what about oil? A lot of oil comes from Canada.
Well,
Trump,
yeah, we're. I mean, that is the number one priority of the country. I mean, last July we had our first LNG, liquid natural gas shipments to Korea. I mean, that's what Mark Carney is doing in Asia. We give the United States a 10% discount on our oil because we only had one pipeline. That's coming to an end. Like again, this was an amazing deal that the United States had, just taking our oil and refining it and then selling it back to us. For some reason America has decided to end this incredibly cushy arrangement that they have. And so we're now selling to primarily to Asia. I mean, we're going to come to economic arrangements with China that would have been inconceivable 5 years ago, exactly because we didn't want to deal with China because of the values difference, but there's no values similarity with America anymore either. So we have to deal with whoever is the competition with America, and that's Asia. And that's well underway. We are going to get to the point where we are not reliant on markets anymore.
well, hopefully Trump is a transitional figure. I mean, is this permanent? I mean, Trump, of course, is now making signals that he wants to serve a third term. And of course,
It
we are
it
already in.
doesn't really matter because the forces. I mean, there are differences of opinion on this. There are lots of differences of opinion on this in Canada. I mean, I think a huge segment of the elites in particular would tell you that they're just keeping their heads under the sand, and will wake up in 3 years when Trump is gone and we can all go back to normal. I mean, in the next civil war, like I really argue pretty strenuously, and I firmly believe that the structural problems in America mean that Trump is really a symptom, not a cause. And we're going to be facing a belligerent, untrustworthy, catastrophically chaotic United States that, on a very simple level, is just not a reliable partner in any way, right? Like, not a military partner, not a trade partner, is going to probably enter some period of authoritarianism, and not just authoritarianism, but actually some kind of sectarian rift. Like there's large amounts of political violence than there's ever been before. So Canada needs to get out of the way of the American collapse, and that's going to be incredibly hard for us to do. But at least, I think one thing is we do know we need to do that. And so, like, the rift is as permanent as American instability. So if you see American instability declining in the next 10 years, then I guess Canada could come back, but I don't really see that happening. I mean, American instability has only been growing since really 2008.
Right, but Canada is key to America's defense. I mean, Trump, even
Well, too
Trump,
bad.
yeah, but Trump, even as much as he's in Putin's pocket, is annoyed at this cruise missile launch, this nuclear-powered cruise missile launch that Russia did that travels for 14,000 miles. NORAD is key to America's defense. If missiles came into the United States from Russia or from North Korea, the Canadians are the first ones to pick it up and warn us. And there's a permanent Canadian officer sitting next to his American counterpart in NORAD,
Yeah.
which is in Colorado. But it's the brains of the entire defense of the United States. If indeed we have to, the only people that can really hurt us are people with nuclear weapons. So this is insane to cut off. How can they do that? How can they possibly cut off Canada from the early warning system?
Well, I don't think your country. I mean, I don't mean this in an offensive way, but I don't think the American is in a place where its own self interests are running it, right? Like it's more in something like an alcoholic, gambling addicted, drug addicted spiral, right? I mean, you had very recently the most elaborate alliance network in the world. It's really shattered. You had until very recently the greatest scientific and engineering research community in the world by far. Everyone was trying to imitate it. You've ruined it. You had until very recently the greatest soft power. in the world, the great aspirational ideal country. Like that's really declining very rapidly. So I mean, I think like NORAD, like I think Canada is really asking itself, and there's popular widespread support for an approach like Finland's whole society defense, where we have conscription, so that we are prepared for if America invades us, and we can put up meaningful resistance. So like that's where we're at, right? And I think the idea, like, forget like Russian nuclear missiles. Like, I mean, there is a very vibrant debate in this country about whether we should become a nuclear power ourselves, right?
Hmm.
And so that's like I think the old arrangements are over.
Wow.
The United States broke them. Like
Right.
that, like it's not, and it's not. There's not really any. Canada takes zero pleasure in this, right? Like
Right.
this is not something we want in any way, but we have to be able to defend ourselves from explicit annexationist threats by the greatest military the world has ever known. And like, and we're trying to like the economic questions are part of this problem, but like there's a whole reevaluation of our diplomatic and military capabilities that is totally consuming this country right now. Like, and I've written about it. I did a podcast called Gloves Off, which was about the beginnings of research into this. And it's, but it's certainly at senior levels.
Right. Well, back in 1813, the city of York, which is later named Toronto, where you are, Stephen, was invaded by American troops who looted the stores and burned the Parliament building. And then 1 year later, in 1814, the British invaded Washington, D.C., and
That's right.
burned the White House and returned the favor.
One of my ancestors was with them on that voyage. Yeah, I mean, ancient history, right? But that was America was 7 times our size then. It's 10 times our size now, but we survived that too.
Mm.
And I think there's the resistance to the United States is sort of in the DNA of Canada for sure. Like it's Northrop Frye, the great literary scholar, said a Canadian is an American who rejects the revolution, and that's kind of how I've always thought of it. But it's yeah, I mean we're in really unprecedented territory for our country. So this ad business, I'm like 10% tariffs on what, like no one is really paying attention to that because like the stakes are clearly much higher for us. We already knew that. And the other thing is like even if we did come to an agreement with the United States, anyone who does come to an agreement with the United States knows that it can be done away with a midnight tweet. Right. Like it's not an actual, like we came to an agreement with the Trump White House in 2018. Clearly it was meaningless. Right.
Right.
So like when an American promise on a trade deal is really not worth anything at the moment. So when they say we're not doing it, it kind of doesn't matter.
Right. But just in closing, though, Stephen, the American people and the Canadian people have always been friends. And I'm assuming
Oh
that they
yeah.
will always. It's just we have the worst leader in our history who's a horrible, dangerous, sick, petty, incompetent, foolish, you know, reality TV star that way out of his depth and is just wreaking havoc around the world. So,
Yeah.
welcome to Trump's America, but it's not the real America.
Well, I mean, I think the American political system is fundamentally kind of on its last legs. And so I mean, I don't think it's really a president, but of course it isn't personal. Like it's not like Canadians don't, like we all have family in America. And there are a lot, I mean, there are plenty of Americans who live in my neighborhood. Like it's not, certainly it would not be any kind of personal animosity. It's just when somebody who's in charge of the greatest military in the world and who shows no compunction about blowing up boats in foreign waters just to make himself feel like he's a 1980s movie president, starts to threaten to annex your country and enslave your children, you have to respond, right? Like there's no other choice, right? So yeah, it's definitely has nothing to do. I mean, I saw a thing on CNN that Canadian people are 60% more popular than Donald Trump in America. right? Like it's not like I don't think it has anything to do with like some kind of American animosity towards Canada. I just don't believe it. But on the other hand, the chaos is spiraling outwards, and we need to protect ourselves.
Well, the same is true here in California, and I thank you for joining us,
Indeed,
Stephen Marche.
yeah, always a pleasure. Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Stephen Marche, who's a novelist and culture writer who has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker, Esquire, and many other outlets. His recent books include The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future, and The Last Election, co-authored with Andrew Yang. And he joined us from Toronto, Canada. We're going to take a brief station break back with an assessment of what's happened at the just concluded ASEAN summit in Malaysia and what was not achieved. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Sarang Shidore, who's Director of the Global South Program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, whose research focuses on geopolitical risk, grand strategy, and climate security, with a special emphasis on Asia and the Global South. And he has an article at Responsible Statecraft, America First Meets ASEAN Way in Kuala Lumpur. Welcome to Background Briefing, Sarang Shidore.
Thank you for having me, Ian, again.
Well, thanks for joining us, Sarang. And President Trump showed up at the ASEAN summit. He's now in Japan. And that in itself was a little unusual. Biden never bothered to show this. Of course, ASEAN is a group of 10 nations: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And they've just added another country, East Timor, just yesterday. There's 680 million people in total. So why did Trump show up, do you think? And also, what came out of this summit?
Right. So I think President Trump's two priorities in visiting Kuala Lumpur were, the first one was to preside over a peace ceremony that sort of celebrated or perhaps bookended a war between, a very short, I wouldn't call it a war, a clash, an armed clash between Thailand and Cambodia that took place just a few months back. And President Trump claims that he made calls to the two leaders and he used the threat of tariffs to bring them to a ceasefire. And the ceremony that actually happened yesterday was to showcase that peace deal, which President Trump said was a peace agreement, but we have some differing accounts. The Thai foreign minister said it was a pathway to peace. So there is some disagreement whether this means that this conflict is over, or it is merely sort of confidence building type of a joint. It was a joint statement that the two leaders issued. So that was the first reason. The second reason was really to conclude and to sort of capstone a bunch of conversations that the United States has been having with these many of these ASEAN countries on trade, and several trade agreements or frameworks or memorandums of understanding were signed during these past 2 days, chiefly with Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, and Cambodia. And the idea there is, other than the United States trying to get advantageous arrangements from its own perspective, it's also about limiting Chinese presence in these countries and aligning U.S. geoeconomic measures that act against China with these countries' own policies in the region.
Well, it seems from the press reports that the U.S. focus was also on doing the groundwork for the summit with Xi Jinping on Thursday in South Korea. But the countries that we're talking about, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, have been slapped with pretty heavy tariffs. So is there any relief there, or are they just negotiating?
Not much. I mean, I think the most detailed of these agreements was with Malaysia that's been published, and the others are more frameworks, or in the case of Thailand, it's more a memorandum of understanding, which is kind of the first step in any agreement process. So we are not there yet where we have everything, every I dotted and every T crossed, except maybe with Malaysia largely, although even there, certain things are not decided. But broadly, the thrust has certainly been a one-way tariff arrangement where the United States has prevailed in terms of slapping those tariffs of about 19 to 20% on these countries. And in return, these countries have not retaliated with their own tariffs. In fact, they have additionally agreed to facilitate certain investments into the United States or buy certain products from the United States, like energy. So it's certainly looking very much like a one-sided arrangement that President Trump has succeeded in getting done, or at least half done in many of these cases.
So, along with the 10, now 11 ASEAN states, they have partners: Australia, Canada, China, India, Japan, New Zealand, Russia, South Korea, and the United States. Russia and India and China didn't show, but it seems that they also, I think the Malaysian host invited Brazil and South Africa. So it seems to have expanded quite a bit beyond the ASEAN countries.
Yes, I think what's been happening is ASEAN of late, and literally in the last 1 year, has sort of become aware of what I call the global south, or what many people call the global south. It's a term well established. This is a large set of developing countries that stretch from Southeast Asia all the way into Latin America, including South Asia and Africa as well. And, ASEAN historically has been very focused on Asia. They were born in a time of when many of these countries were worried about communism. The original founders of ASEAN were, and they were sort of a pro-American Cold War era pact, not a military pact, but a more entrenching certain norms of free markets and sort of, being broadly friendly to the United States. And over time, ASEAN has grown and encompassed all the countries of Southeast Asia, including communist countries like Vietnam and Laos, and authoritarian states like Cambodia and others. So it's not really about a type of domestic political system anymore. It's a regional organization. And their focus has been very much on economic integration, prosperity, human connectivity, travel, cultural connectivity, a set of political norms for the region. What has happened with Malaysia's chairmanship this year, which is concluding now, but over the last 1 year, has been that Malaysia has stepped out and done two things. One thing it did was to bring in the Gulf Cooperation Council, the UAEs and the Saudi Arabias and the Qatars, into a direct dialogue format with ASEAN. They had a ASEAN GCC China summit a few months back where they reached out and tried to find some common elements. This is interesting because ASEAN as a body has not really done that before. They have not had a structured summit with the GCC before. So that was Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar's outreach. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar has also done a major, in his individual capacity as Malaysian leader, outreach to BRICS. In fact, this past year, we have seen a number of ASEAN states associate with BRICS. Indonesia has joined BRICS as full member. Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam have joined as what are called partner countries, which is a lower tier of membership. But nevertheless, for the first time, we are seeing ASEAN states not only notice BRICS, but actually join it. And that has created a whole new connectivity with Brazil and South Africa, being the two of the original founders of BRICS that were never really in the ASEAN mindshare space. And so inviting President Lula and President Ramaphosa to Kuala Lumpur marks a kind of a coming out of ASEAN and a connectivity that it's seeking with the broader global South and the middle powers in it.
Well, I'm afraid we ran out of time, but obviously the hideous war in Myanmar, Burma rages on, and that horrible government is a part of ASEAN. And the clashes, the maritime clashes between China and the Philippines also will continue, it seems. So there's still a lot of work to do.
No doubt, ASEAN is actually challenged in precisely the ways you mentioned, and not to mention the Thailand-Cambodia clash that sort of came out of nowhere. And we are seeing stresses on the organization like we haven't seen for some time.
Well, Sarang Shidore, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Sarang Shidore, who's the director of the Global South Program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, where he focuses on geopolitical risk, grand strategy, and climate security with a special emphasis on Asia and the Global South. And he has an article at Responsible Statecraft, America First Meets ASEAN Way in Kuala Lumpur. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.